Boom, and we are live on the Phoenix RIA and the Just for Flips, this one, Facebook, our YouTube channel. We had our Lunch and Learn series kind of cancel, and we've gone to our just Tuesday 2 o'clock meetings. But we had Mark on the books, and you get a free 15 minutes with an attorney. You might as well take it, right?
I like that. That's where you should start calling these. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about the evictions in Arizona? What's happening?
There's actually a ton of activity right now. I mean, Chris, you couldn't have timed it better in terms of what's going on. There's just a lot of news out of there, a lot of activity. Before I even jump in, by the way, I do like the Just for Flips light behind you. That is a nice touch.
Yeah, it's like my little green head, right?
I gotta start
if I could match it like perfectly like that. Right?
That's well done. So I guess the hard news right off the bat is there was a shooting in Tucson due to an eviction recently. A constable, a property manager, and another tenant were shot in Tucson when the constable went out there to complete the writ of restitution, which is when they actually physically removed them.
Yeah.
It had been related to an incident where the tenant had actually threatened the neighbors. They went to court, they got the eviction, and then when they went to court to actually remove the person, he killed 3 people. And it really reminds you of the severity of what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? I mean, it's not something that should be taken lightly. We never really joke around about evictions here at our firm. It's unfortunate for the people going through it, but at the same time, it's the only remedy landlords have, and that's a big problem that people don't realize. There's a lot of negative media coverage around landlords right now, and evictions specifically, right. But ultimately, property owners realize that's the only remedy they have. If a tenant's causing problems, if a tenant's not paying rent, if they're disturbing the quiet enjoyment of their neighbors, it always falls on the landlord to evict. And you see all this press out there about how evictions are bad and numbers are going up. And I'll explain, the reality there. But if you have like a small apartment community and you got one tenant complaining to you that they're being threatened by the next tenant, it's your job as the landlord to evict them, right? And that's the only remedy you have. And so as much as the bad PR there is, that's what landlords have to do. And as I'm saying, there's negative PR across the country, across the board right now. There's a lot of press as of, I think, since starting in August, news media has picked up here in Arizona specifically saying that our evictions are the highest they've ever been since 2008. So basically,
does the moratorium how much does that have to do with it?
There's excellent question. So there's a number of factors there. One is the moratorium, right? You had basically a year and a half where you couldn't evict somebody. So obviously there's a backlog of cases of people that just didn't pay for that long. And so they needed to be evicted. But that's only the beginning part of it. I mean, it's also, if you think about the population growth, and you know this from your business as well, Chris, we've picked up in the past couple of years about 400,000 people to just the county alone. Maricopa is the fastest growing county in the entire country and has been for a long time. Well, I liken that. I mean, people brush off that statistic, but our Supreme Court, the Arizona Supreme Court, actually published, after all that news media came out, Supreme Court went back and looked at a per capita basis, what our eviction is per capita. So actually going down, and our numbers are still not where they were.
Yeah.
Because the difference is if you look at, let's say 1950, for example, and you say, oh, there weren't a lot of car accidents in 1950. We have so many more cars now. Cars, more car accidents. Cars must be dangerous. Well, no, we just have a lot more cars. Our population's gone over 10% up. The evictions, everything else is going to go.
What is just quick question. So you got to 400,000. What is the average number of evictions in Maricopa County in a month? Let's just say that you handle.
Yeah, we keep our private numbers private. I'll be honest there. I like that question though. I can't remember. Is it 6,000? It's between 5,000 and 6,000, I believe.
Okay, so if we went from 4,000 to 6,000, but we gained 400,000 people,
exactly. Evictions.
Do the math.
Exactly. Evictions will go up. There's no question about that. It's really the per capita that what matters. The other thing that people complain about recently in the news is that the actual monetary judgments are going up a little bit. One, obviously rents are higher because we're underbuilt as a valley, as a city, as an entire state, we're underbuilt. And obviously that's good for investors. We're still well below where we should have been. as an entire state, we've been underdeveloped since 2011. And so think about all the people that have moved here, all the real estate, and that kind of explains what the pricing is and why the rents are so high. But it all kind of ties in as a factor of those. If you overnight built more properties, rents would go down, but that's just not happening. So, and even though if you drive around, you definitely see a lot of apartments.
Well, I did just on kind of, I'm just going to add some comments to that, but the new build construction is way down, like down by 40% based on the Crawford report for last month. But ironically, the multifamily is way up, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if you saw that come out yesterday or not, but
I didn't see the report. I knew that from the multifamily side. Because they start this year, I think, is more building than they've had again since 2011, because it needs to keep up with the demand of people coming here. Otherwise, you're just going to see rents continue to increase if you don't build to keep up with it. The big issue that also came out that's relevant for your viewers is as of last week, Tucson just announced their made source of income a protected class, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal. But again, this is just city of Tucson. They're now mandating that property owners accept Section 8.
Okay.
So if if you own a couple rentals and you don't understand Section 8 very well, you definitely need to familiarize yourself if you're in Tucson. And it's always pitched as, oh, well, the government just pays the rent, which is true. It's great that the money comes in first of the month. It's not something you have to worry about. But the problem is you add a lot of the hurdles that Section 8 brings in terms of the government does inspections. They control the first payment, which sometimes is up to 60 days late. They also have a right to not pay if they believe you didn't pass your inspection. So what used to be in Tucson like a true landlord-tenant relationship between landlord and tenant, you now have landlord, tenant, and the government as parties. And so I think for your viewers, the biggest thing they need to know coming out of last week is if they get calls, if they own properties in Tucson, the answer now is yes, we take Section 8, provided the person still qualifies. You have, criminal background, those kind of things.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So like it's mandatory. It's just, you can't, is there a certain class like mobile homes or condos that doesn't fit, or is it all single family, or just across the board?
Across the board. They made it as a protected class under fair housing, so it applies to everybody.
Okay.
So any asset within Tucson, across the board, you have to accept Section 8. Now they have to qualify, and right now with rents being high, they're probably not going to qualify. If we see a turn, it'll change. It's going to affect more like the C and D type properties.
Right.
But it's also going to affect a lot of the mom and pop investors that aren't pushing the rents as much. And so they may now be caught where they may have to take Section 8 when they're not ready for it. Right. And again, I'm a big proponent of the program, provided it's voluntary and owners know how to participate. But if you don't know how to participate, it causes a lot of problems.
Yeah, everybody in the past is like, oh, Section 8 is great because you get that rent on the first of the month, every month, without question.
Yeah, and that's great if they do it. It's just if you have to send notices, you have to know that you have to send it to the public agency. You have to actually do extra steps. It's no longer a two-party contract.
Yeah.
For those people your viewers that aren't in Tucson that are like, thank God I can just ignore that. The fear definitely is that other cities will follow Tucson if that's not challenged. Tempe, I think, is a prime candidate. Phoenix is a prime candidate, and Flagstaff are probably the top three that are watching to see what happens in Tucson.
That's interesting. Now, we got to go to my favorite subject real quick. What about foreclosures? How does that still work on, the courthouse? You buy a house. How does the eviction still work there? We're still good? What?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple years back, I think we've talked about this before, evictions post-trustee sale, they've made it very clear you have to file those in Superior Court now. So it's a slower process. It's a bit more expensive, but the actual process is very straightforward. You're just slowed down. Back in the day, we used to do those through justice court until finally they said no to that anymore. And
usually I used to tell people it was a 5-day notice. It was 5 days of the court date and it was 5 days of the constable. And those were just that was kind of just like, back in 2012, 13, it was just like 5 days to notice, 5 days to court date, 5 days to constable. That was kind of the rule. And those are business days, but so what is it now?
Yeah, so you still have that same 5-day period. You're still giving that same demand you're talking about that you've been doing for years, obviously. But when we file, it kind of comes to a screeching halt. We basically will file the case after the 5 days. Make sure you hand deliver that, by the way. There are people who are looking at that. Make sure you're trying to actually give it to a person in the property. We can file 5 days later. Generally, we're in court about 2 to 3 weeks later. And if a trial is needed, within 10 days of that. So you're looking at about a month process for the courts. But the actual writ to get somebody physically ousted after the judgment, the sheriff's office for the county thinks it can take up to 60 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
what used to be a justice court 1 month is now you're potentially, depending on how hard they fight you, a 3-month process.
Okay. So that's new for, foreclosure buyers. Everybody is calling me, because it's kind of like the wave's coming. Foreclosures are up 60%. I'm like, no, they're not really that bad. It's just they can actually file them now. They weren't allowed to file them before.
Yeah, well,
They
people have
they had
equity.
2 years that they had backlogged. So
Yeah, and I keep getting that same question as well, as whether I expect that to happen or not. But it seems like there's a lot of equity out there still, so there's no cliff that we're going to be falling off anytime soon.
yeah, it's just a different kind of animal. Like, the notice will go, but there's going to be 20 dudes like me knocking on their door, the day after the notice. Like, I want to buy your house. I want to buy your house.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's definitely a different game with how much people are looking at real estate here than previously.
yeah. So, well, the last time is, call it, this is kind of the same kind of mark that we had in 2007. But, when everybody was getting, 95% mortgages, and it takes a 10 or 15, or, it took, in some places, it took like a 50% decrease. Well, now it's short sale only, so, but when you've had a huge run up and then you take a 10% decrease on values, then you still
Doesn't
have
hurt.
it.
It's aggravating, but it doesn't hurt as bad.
Yeah. So anything else you can update us with? I appreciate you jumping on last minute.
Of course, no. I'm always happy to join you and the viewers. I mean, I think the other thing that we're seeing, just so people are aware, is bankruptcies are increasing as well, anecdotally across the board. And I think that's part of the moratorium as well, where people could live for 16 months free. And then post that, there was, millions of dollars in rental assistance that's slowly been coming out, but it's running out now. We're getting closer to that. And so as people realizing they're not getting their rent paid by the government and they're not protected by the moratorium, we've seen clients, they're owed $40,000, $50,000 in rent. And so a lot of those tenants, their next step to try and delay it is to file bankruptcy.
Right.
And so I won't bore everybody with the intricacies of how the bankruptcy court works, but just remember, and I can't stress this enough, if your occupant is in bankruptcy, I don't care if it's a post-trustee sale, I don't care if it's a landlord-tenant situation, you cannot touch them until you first go to the bankruptcy court and get permission. There's penalties if you start sending them demands saying, hey, get out of my property. Always talk to an attorney first, go into the bankruptcy court, get permission, and then come back and do the eviction.
Yeah. And there's good attorneys out there that handle that. And do you guys handle that, or?
No, we have somebody that just does bankruptcy outside of our firm that we work with that just does that. You really need somebody that does bankruptcy just the same way we handle the eviction side.
Yeah. I used to use, forget his name, Napper, I think was his last name. Yeah.
Dave Knapper. Yep.
Yeah.
Still use them.
So yeah, that's who I used back in the day. But anyway, thanks for jumping on and talking to us for our 15 minutes. I'll get this out and I'll blast it out to our database so they can watch the replay on the Facebook. And I've been using Mark's firm for eviction since I want to say 20 years. I think like 2001. So he's done every one of my evictions for 20 years. So if you need a good eviction attorney, Mark's your guy.
I appreciate that so much, Chris. Thank you for having me.
All right. See ya.